A Life of Secrets. In late March 2017, the peaceful suburb of Fairfax, Virginia, was shaken by a tragedy that would expose secrets buried deep within a seemingly ordinary family. Abigail Warren, a 29-year-old graphic designer, was found dead in her home under mysterious circumstances. Her murder would soon reveal a tale of forbidden love, betrayal, and deadly obsession. Abigail was known in the community for her creativity and compassion. She worked from home, designing promotional materials for charities and humanitarian organizations. Her designs graced the websites of well-known nonprofits, advocating for issues close to her heart. With a soft-spoken demeanor and a reputation for kindness, she was admired by her friends and neighbors alike. But those who knew her also noticed a restlessness in her, a subtle discontent that she rarely spoke about. Abigail had married Travis Warren, a 31-year-old government contractor. 5 years earlier, they had met in college, their relationship blossoming quickly, but life had taken an unexpected turn when financial troubles hit the couple hard. Struggling to make ends meet, they had reluctantly moved in with Travis's father, Howard Warren, a retired Army colonel. Though the arrangement was meant to be temporary, the months dragged on, and tensions rose within the household. Howard Warren was a tall, imposing man with a strict military background. At 66, he maintained the discipline and rigidity of his years in service, and he had always expected the same from his family. He saw Travis's financial difficulties as a sign of weakness and often made his disappointment known. This created an unspoken divide between father and son, a distance that only deepened as they shared the same roof. For Abigail, the situation was stifling. She was trapped between a struggling marriage and the overbearing presence of her father-in-law, whom she initially respected but soon came to see as controlling and at times intimidating. Travis, on the other hand, seemed indifferent to her needs, focused solely on repairing his financial situation and pleasing his father. The love that had once brought them together had faded, replaced by arguments and misunderstandings. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Travis, Abigail retreated to the quiet sanctuary of her room, seeking solace in the glow of her laptop screen. It was then that she received a message from Howard, who was downstairs in his study. The message was unexpected, but its tone was warm, even sympathetic. "I know it's been hard for you, Abigail. I understand better than you might think. If you ever need to talk, I'm here." She stared at the message, her emotions tangled. Howard was the last person she expected comfort from, yet his words resonated with the loneliness she had been feeling. Hesitantly, she replied, and what began as a few polite exchanges evolved into something far more dangerous. Over the following weeks, Abigail found herself drawn into a web of secret conversations and stolen moments. Howard, in his own way, seemed to understand her better than Travis did. They would speak late into the night, discussing everything from Abigail's frustrations in her marriage to her dreams and ambitions. She felt a connection with Howard, one that went beyond words, a closeness she hadn't felt in years. Their relationship soon crossed a line. What started as harmless companionship grew into a forbidden romance, a dangerous affair hidden under the very roof where her husband slept. Abigail was torn, consumed by guilt and exhilaration in equal measure. She knew the affair was wrong, yet she couldn't resist the escape it offered from the confines of her unhappy marriage. Howard, meanwhile, became increasingly possessive. What had started as a secret tryst transformed into something darker, an obsession that grew stronger with each encounter. He began to make demands on Abigail's time, expecting her to meet him whenever he summoned her, pushing her to confide in him about every detail of her life. Trapped in the toxic dynamic between a neglectful husband and a possessive lover, Abigail's life spiraled out of control. She felt the weight of her decisions crushing down on her. Yet every time she tried to break things off with Howard, he would remind her of the power he held in her life, of how he had been there when she needed him most. He had a way of twisting her emotions, making her feel indebted, as though she owed him her loyalty. As the weeks went by, Abigail's mental and emotional state began to deteriorate. She threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the chaos that had taken over her life. She worked late into the night, her fingers numb from hours of designing, her mind exhausted from the constant push and pull of her emotions. She began to show signs of stress. Friends noticed that her once sparkling eyes had lost their luster, and her infectious laughter was replaced by a hollow silence. When asked if she was okay, she would force a smile and assure them that everything was fine, though inside, she felt like she was slowly unraveling. Just as she reached her breaking point, Abigail confided in her closest friend, Lisa, during a rare lunch outing. Lisa had noticed the change in her and had gently urged her to open up. Over a cup of coffee, Abigail hesitated before revealing the affair, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lisa," she confessed, her hands trembling as she spoke. "I feel trapped. I love Travis, or at least I used to. But with Howard, it's complicated. He understands me in ways Travis never has." Lisa listened in shock, struggling to process the gravity of what her friend had just revealed. She tried to reason with Abigail, to make her see the danger of the path she was on. "You need to end this, Abby," Lisa urged, her voice firm but compassionate. "This isn't love. It's a trap. You're hurting yourself, and if Travis finds out, or worse, if Howard's obsession turns darker." Abigail nodded, tears filling her eyes. She knew Lisa was right, but the thought of ending things terrified her. Howard had a way of making her feel indispensable, like he was the only one who truly valued her. The affair had become an addiction, a toxic cycle she didn't know how to break. Desperate to regain control, Abigail began to plan her escape. She would leave, start fresh, and end both her marriage and the affair. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the idea of living in freedom, of being able to breathe without fear, filled her with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. But Howard sensed her distance, his possessive nature detecting the slightest change. He began to confront her, his tone shifting from warmth to something cold, almost menacing. He would remind her of everything he had done for her, accusing her of betrayal if she even hinted at leaving. One evening, after a particularly intense argument, Abigail finally gathered the courage to tell Howard that it was over. She couldn't continue the affair, and she was leaving both him and Travis. She thought he would understand, that he might even let her go. But his reaction sent chills down her spine. Howard's face twisted with anger, his eyes filled with a fury she had never seen before. "You don't get to just walk away from me, Abigail," he snarled, his voice laced with venom. "You belong to me." Frightened, she retreated to her room, locking the door and collapsing onto the bed, her heart pounding. She realized, with a sickening dread, that her affair with Howard had created a monster. The man who had once comforted her, who had made her feel understood, was now a threat looming over her life. In the days that followed, Abigail made plans to leave quietly, hoping to avoid a confrontation with Howard. She packed her things in secret, hiding her belongings in her car, preparing to leave in the dead of night. She didn't tell Travis, knowing that any attempt to explain herself would only make things worse. But fate had other plans. On the night she planned to leave, a storm rolled in, bringing with it a dark omen. Abigail felt a strange sense of dread, a feeling she couldn't shake as she lay in bed, waiting for midnight to arrive. The house was silent, the only sound the rain tapping against the windows. As she drifted in and out of sleep, she heard footsteps approaching her room. Her heart raced, a sense of impending doom filling her. She hoped it was just Travis, maybe coming to check on her. But when the door creaked open, she saw the silhouette of a figure standing there, watching her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. It was Howard. The darkness in his eyes was unmistakable, a twisted obsession that had crossed the line into something terrifying. Abigail tried to sit up, to say something, but before she could, he lunged at her, his hands closing around her throat. In that moment, she realized that her affair with Howard would be the end of her. The man who had once made her feel seen, understood, was now the man who would take her life. As the struggle ensued, the walls of the house that had once been her prison echoed with her final desperate cries for help. And when the silence fell, the storm outside raged on, a haunting reminder of a love that had turned deadly. The aftermath of betrayal. The morning of March 28, 2017, dawned cold and gray over Fairfax, Virginia. A light drizzle misted the quiet neighborhood, casting an eerie gloom over the Warren family home. Inside, however, a scene of unimaginable horror awaited, one that would forever shatter the illusion of peace and respectability that had masked the family's dark secrets. It was just after 6:30 a.m. when Travis Warren returned from his usual morning jog around the nearby lake. He was exhausted, his mind still clouded from a restless night of tossing and turning, troubled by vague arguments and lingering frustrations he couldn't shake. When he entered the house, something immediately felt off. The air was thick, charged with an unsettling silence that sent a shiver down his spine. As he walked into the living room, his heart lurched. The room was in disarray. The coffee table lay overturned, shards of glass scattered across the floor. Family photos were strewn across the carpet, frames cracked, as if a violent struggle had taken place. But it was the sight at the center of the room that sent him reeling. There, crumpled on the floor, lay Abigail. Travis froze, a wave of disbelief and horror washing over him. His wife's body lay twisted at an unnatural angle, her face pale and bruised. A dark scarf was wrapped tightly around her neck, and her once bright eyes stared lifelessly into the void. It took him a moment to process the scene before him, to comprehend the fact that Abigail, his wife, his partner of 5 years, was gone. No, 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 no. Travis's voice broke as he staggered forward, his knees giving way as he collapsed beside her, clutching her hand. Abigail, please, wake up. Desperation gripped him as he fumbled for his phone, his trembling fingers barely able to dial 911. His voice cracked as he spoke to the operator, struggling to find words through the haze of shock and grief. My wife is dead. Someone killed her. Please, send someone. Within minutes, paramedics and police officers arrived at the house. As they assessed the scene, confirming that Abigail was indeed beyond help, Travis was led outside, his face a mask of anguish as he tried to make sense of the nightmare that had befallen him. Neighbors gathered on the street, their faces etched with shock and confusion as they watched the police secure the house, yellow crime scene tape blocking off the once quiet home. Detective Raymond Ellis, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for his sharp intuition, arrived shortly after, accompanied by his partner, Detective Maria Singh. Ellis took in the scene with a grim expression, his years of experience telling him that this was no ordinary case. The violence, the signs of a struggle, it all pointed to a deeply personal crime, something born out of rage or jealousy. "Let's get to work," he murmured to Singh, who nodded, her face somber as she began examining the area. Inside, the living room was a mess. The detectives noted the overturned furniture, the shattered glass, the family photos strewn about, all evidence of a violent confrontation. Near Abigail's body, they found a broken vase, its sharp edges stained with small flecks of blood. It seemed as though she had tried to defend herself, to fight back against whoever had attacked her. The scarf around her neck, which had been used to strangle her, was tightly knotted, suggesting that her killer had intended to make sure she couldn't escape. As Ellis carefully examined the scene, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was a crime of passion, an act driven by intense emotion, rather than calculated malice. Singh approached him, her voice low. "No signs of forced entry, Detective. Whoever did this either had a key or was let in willingly." Ellis nodded, glancing back at Abigail's body with a frown. "Which means she probably knew her killer." Outside, Travis paced anxiously, his mind racing with questions and fragments of memory. He had argued with Abigail the night before, a heated exchange about money and their struggling marriage. He had gone to bed angry, shutting himself in his office to work on a presentation. He couldn't remember hearing anything unusual after that, but the guilt gnawed at him. Had he missed something? Had Abigail tried to call for him? Detective Ellis approached him, his expression serious. "Mr. Warren, I understand that this is a difficult time, but we need to ask you some questions about last night. It's important for the investigation." Travis swallowed, nodding as he tried to steady himself. I'll answer whatever you need. Just, please, find out who did this." Ellis studied him for a moment, noting the grief etched into his face, but also the slight tremor in his hands. "When was the last time you saw your wife?" "Last night," Travis replied, his voice strained. We had a disagreement. It was just about money, about everything that's been going wrong. She went to bed early, and I stayed up working in my office. I didn't hear anything after that." "Did you notice anything unusual when you left for your jog this morning?" Ellis pressed, his tone measured. Travis shook his head, his brow furrowed. "No, everything seemed normal. I didn't know. If I'd known." His voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of his sorrow. Ellis glanced at Singh, who was taking notes, before returning his attention to Travis. "Do you know if Abigail had any enemies? Anyone who might have wanted to hurt her?" Travis hesitated, his gaze distant. "Not that I can think of. She was loved by everyone who knew her. Abigail was a good person. She didn't deserve this." As Ellis continued to question Travis, his mind turned to the possibility of hidden tensions within the household. The financial struggles, the strain of living with Travis's father. It all pointed to a family under pressure, one that might have been harboring secrets. And then there was Howard. Howard Warren arrived at the house later that morning, his expression carefully controlled as he approached the police line. He had been away the previous evening, attending a military reunion in the next town over, and had stayed overnight at a hotel. When he received the news of Abigail's death, he was shocked, but there was something about his reaction that struck Singh as calculated, almost performative. She watched as Howard approached Travis, pulling his son into a stiff embrace, his voice filled with a forced sympathy. "I'm so sorry, son. I can't believe this happened." Travis nodded, his face buried in his father's shoulder, but Singh could sense the tension between them. It wasn't just grief that hung in the air. It was something more, something darker. She made a mental note to dig deeper into Howard's relationship with Abigail, suspecting that there might be more to the story than met the eye. Later, in a quiet corner of the yard, Singh approached Howard, her expression neutral. "Mr. Warren, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Abigail." Howard's face hardened, but he nodded, his voice steady. "Of course. Anything to help find who did this to her." "Were you close to your daughter-in-law?" Singh asked, watching his reaction closely. He hesitated, a brief flicker of something crossing his face. We had a cordial relationship. She was a bright young woman, and I respected her." Singh raised an eyebrow, sensing his discomfort. "And how did you feel about her and Travis living here with you?" Howard's jaw tightened. "It was a temporary arrangement. I allowed them to stay because they needed help, but it wasn't ideal. I had certain expectations for my family." Singh nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Did those expectations ever lead to tension between you and Abigail?" Howard's eyes narrowed, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "What exactly are you implying, Detective?" Singh shrugged, her tone casual. "Just trying to understand the dynamics within the household, Mr. Warren. Sometimes people clash over personal matters." Howard's expression darkened, and for a brief moment, Singh saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, perhaps even resentment. But just as quickly, he composed himself, his voice cold. "Abigail was my daughter-in-law. Whatever disagreements we may have had, they were private matters. Nothing that would lead to this." Singh noted his reaction, her suspicions deepening. There was something about Howard's demeanor that unsettled her, a sense that he was hiding something, that his stoic facade masked a more volatile nature. As the investigation progressed, Ellis and Singh focused on unraveling the tangled relationships within the Warren household. They interviewed friends, neighbors, and colleagues, piecing together a picture of Abigail's life, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, weighed down by financial struggles, and, as they soon discovered, caught in an affair that would ultimately seal her fate. Through conversations with friends and recovered messages, the detectives learned of Abigail's secret relationship with Howard, a revelation that shocked even the most seasoned members of the investigative team. The affair had been a desperate escape for Abigail, a misguided attempt to find solace in a life that had left her feeling empty and unfulfilled. But what she hadn't anticipated was the darkness lurking beneath Howard's charm, an obsession that had transformed him into something dangerous. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Abigail's murder was an act of passion, a crime born out of jealousy and control. Her attempts to leave, to reclaim her life, had triggered something in Howard, a possessiveness that would not allow her to escape. As Ellis and Singh prepared to confront Howard with their findings, they knew they were stepping into treacherous territory. This was no ordinary case. It was a family drama steeped in betrayal, manipulation, and a love that had turned deadly. In the days that followed, the investigation would reach a fever pitch, the Warrens' carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of the truth. And as the detectives closed in on Howard, they were about to expose a web of lies that would send shockwaves through the community, forever altering the lives of those caught in its grasp. Unmasking the killer. Detective Raymond Ellis sat across from Howard Warren in the cramped interrogation room, his gaze steady as he took in the older man's carefully controlled expression. The sterile, dimly lit space seemed to press down on them, amplifying the tension that lingered in the air like a dark cloud. Howard had been brought in for questioning following revelations that shook the investigative team. Revelations of a forbidden affair that cast a sinister new light on Abigail's tragic death. Detective Singh had stayed late the previous night, poring over text messages, emails, and social media exchanges that painted a disturbing picture of Abigail's relationship with her father-in-law. The messages between Abigail and Howard oscillated between tender and possessive, revealing a relationship that had evolved from a simple attraction to an obsession on Howard's part. It was clear that he had become consumed by the idea of Abigail as his, and as they closed in on the final messages, one thing became undeniable. Abigail had planned to end the affair. She wanted out. Ellis leaned forward, breaking the silence. "Mr. Warren, I'll get straight to the point. We know about your relationship with Abigail." Howard's face remained impassive, though his hands tightened slightly, betraying a hint of tension. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Detective," he replied, his voice cold and measured. Ellis raised an eyebrow, not missing the shift in Howard's posture. "We have evidence, Mr. Warren. Messages between you and Abigail. It's all very revealing." He let the weight of his words settle, watching as Howard's jaw clenched, a flicker of something dark flashing in his eyes. "There's no use denying it," Ellis continued, his voice firm. "We know that you and Abigail were involved in an affair, and we also know that she wanted to end it. The question is, how did you feel about that?" Howard shifted uncomfortably, his mask of control slipping ever so slightly. "Abigail was a troubled woman. She sought comfort where she could find it. If she confided in me, it was because she felt alone in that house. Her marriage to Travis was failing." Ellis nodded, feigning understanding. "Right. And you, as her father-in-law, felt it was your duty to provide that comfort." Howard's face tightened, the implication clear. "I didn't force anything, Detective. Abigail came to me. She needed someone to talk to." Detective Singh, who had been quietly observing from the corner, leaned forward. "But did you need her, Mr. Warren? Did you develop feelings for her that went beyond mere comfort?" Howard's gaze snapped to her, anger flashing in his eyes. "Be careful with your accusations," he warned, his tone low and dangerous. Abigail was a complicated woman, and I did what I could to support her. Singh remained unfazed, her expression calm. Support her, or control her? Because from what we've seen, it seems like you didn't take her desire to end things very well. In fact, it seems like you didn't want to let her go at all. Howard's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Singh exchanged a glance with Ellis, both detectives sensing they were finally getting under his skin. "Mr. Warren," Ellis continued, his tone hardening, "the evidence we have suggests that Abigail was trying to leave you. She was planning to end the affair, and we believe that didn't sit well with you. Is that why you went to her room that night?" Howard scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a derisive look. "This is absurd. You think I killed her because she wanted to end a relationship that never should have started. She was my daughter-in-law, for God's sake." Ellis's eyes narrowed, unyielding. "Then explain the messages, the possessiveness, the threats that we found. You told her she belonged to you. You called her yours. That doesn't sound like a father-in-law, Mr. Warren. It sounds like a man who had become dangerously obsessed." For a moment, Howard's face twisted with anger, his composed facade cracking. But he quickly regained control, crossing his arms defiantly. "I didn't kill Abigail. You have nothing to tie me to her death." Ellis smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Not yet, but we're getting there." Meanwhile, Travis was sitting in another interrogation room down the hall, his face pale and haunted as he tried to process the revelations about his wife and his father. The detectives had informed him of the affair, the secrets that Abigail and Howard had kept hidden from him, and he was struggling to keep his composure. Detective Singh entered the room, sitting across from him with a gentle expression. She knew this was a delicate situation, but she needed Travis's cooperation. She needed to know what he knew, if he had ever suspected anything, if he had noticed changes in his father or his wife. "Travis," she began softly, "I know this is a lot to take in, but we need your help. Anything you can tell us about the dynamics in your household, any changes in Abigail or your father's behavior, it could be crucial." Travis swallowed, his gaze fixed on the table as he tried to gather his thoughts. I didn't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I knew we were having problems, that she was unhappy, but I never thought. My father." His voice trailed off, filled with disbelief and betrayal. Singh nodded, her tone gentle. "I understand, but think back, Travis. Was there anything unusual, any arguments between Abigail and Howard, anything that struck you as off?" Travis hesitated, his brow furrowing as he recalled fragmented memories, moments that now took on a new, darker significance. "There were times when I'd come home, and they'd be sitting together, talking in hushed tones. I thought he was just trying to help her, to be there for her since I wasn't around as much." His voice cracked, guilt flooding his expression. "I should have been there for her, maybe if I had been." Singh placed a comforting hand on his arm. "This isn't your fault, Travis. Abigail made her choices, and so did your father. We're just trying to understand what led to her death." Travis nodded, wiping his eyes as he took a shaky breath. "There was one night, a few weeks before she died. I came home late, and I heard them arguing. It was intense, like they were, I don't know, like something had happened between them. I didn't confront them. I didn't want to get involved in whatever it was." He shook his head, regret evident in his voice. "I thought maybe they were arguing about money or about me. I never thought. God, I was so blind." Singh's mind raced, connecting the dots. The argument Travis had overheard could have been a turning point, a moment when Abigail had tried to end things, only to be met with Howard's resistance. It was becoming clear that the obsession Howard harbored for his daughter-in-law had grown dangerous, his possessiveness reaching a breaking point. "Thank you, Travis," she said softly, standing up. "You've been very helpful. We'll get to the bottom of this." Back in the other interrogation room, Ellis continued to press Howard, his questions becoming sharper, more pointed. He was determined to break through the man's wall of denial, to force him to confront the truth. "We know you were at the house that night, Howard," Ellis said, his voice like steel. "The surveillance footage from the hotel shows you leaving just before midnight. You had time to return home, confront Abigail, and commit the crime before going back. You tried to cover your tracks, but were not as easily fooled." Howard's eyes flashed with anger, his composure unraveling as the evidence mounted against him. "I told you, I didn't kill her." Ellis leaned in, his gaze unyielding. "Then tell me, Howard, why were you so obsessed with her? Why did you think she belonged to you? Was it the thrill, the power, or were you simply unable to handle the fact that she wanted to leave you?" Howard clenched his fists, his face a mask of fury. "She was mine," he hissed, his voice barely controlled. "She came to me. She needed me, not that weak, spineless son of mine. I was the one who understood her, who gave her the attention she deserved. She was supposed to stay with me." The room fell silent as Ellis and Singh exchanged a grim glance, realizing they were on the brink of a confession. "But she didn't want to stay with you, did she?" Ellis pressed, his voice low. "She wanted to be free of you, to leave this twisted relationship behind. And you couldn't handle that, could you? The thought of losing her, it drove you mad." Howard's shoulders slumped, a defeated look crossing his face. For the first time, the weight of his actions seemed to sink in, the reality of what he had done crashing down on him. She betrayed me," he whispered, his voice filled with bitterness. "After everything I did for her, she tried to leave me. I couldn't let her go. I couldn't." Singh leaned forward, her voice soft yet unyielding. "So you killed her." Howard's eyes filled with a twisted mixture of regret and rage as he looked up, the truth finally escaping his lips. "Yes, I couldn't let her walk away from me. She was mine." As his confession echoed in the room, Ellis and Singh shared a look of quiet triumph. They had finally unmasked the killer, exposing the dangerous obsession that had led to Abigail's tragic death. The case that had begun as a tangled web of secrets and lies had reached its devastating conclusion, a story of love turned toxic, of control and jealousy that had ultimately destroyed everything it touched. The trial and revelation. The news of Howard Warren's arrest sent shockwaves through Fairfax, Virginia. The scandalous details of his affair with Abigail and his subsequent confession to her murder were plastered across every headline, transforming a quiet suburban tragedy into a nationwide media frenzy. People who once respected Howard as a retired military colonel and community figure now saw him as something far darker, a man whose dangerous obsession had led to the ultimate betrayal of his own family. In the days leading up to the trial, Travis struggled to reconcile his feelings. The betrayal of discovering his father's affair with his wife was enough to leave him shattered, but the knowledge that his father had murdered Abigail twisted the knife further. He felt a storm of emotions: anger, sorrow, guilt, but above all, a profound sense of emptiness. He had loved Abigail, even if their marriage had faltered, and now he was left to grapple with the fallout of a tragedy that seemed beyond comprehension. The trial was set to begin in early November. The court proceedings promised to be lengthy and brutal, with the defense working to downplay Howard's obsession as mere infatuation, rather than the dangerous fixation it had truly become. Meanwhile, the prosecution was determined to paint Howard as a manipulative, possessive man who had killed Abigail when she tried to break free from his control. Both sides prepared for a battle that would lay bare every dark secret, every hidden motive, every twisted detail. On the morning of the trial's first day, the courthouse was swarming with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. Travis sat in the front row of the courtroom, his expression hollow as he stared at the man in handcuffs, the father he barely recognized anymore. Howard was led into the courtroom by officers, his face expressionless, though a flicker of defiance remained in his eyes. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting the evidence they had meticulously gathered. Detective Ellis was among the first to take the stand, recounting the harrowing details of the crime scene and the investigation that had led them to Howard's door. He described the violent struggle in the Warren household, the overturned furniture, the broken glass, and the scarf that had been used to strangle Abigail, a scarf that bore traces of Howard's DNA, further linking him to the murder. Ellis's testimony painted a chilling picture of Howard's possessive behavior and his refusal to accept Abigail's decision to end the affair. The prosecutor emphasized how Howard had manipulated Abigail's vulnerability, drawing her into a toxic relationship that ultimately became a death sentence when she tried to escape. Mr. Warren saw himself as more than a father-in-law, the prosecutor declared, his voice resonating through the courtroom. He saw himself as a man entitled to possess and control Abigail, and when she rejected him, he chose to destroy her rather than let her go. Travis sat silently, his gaze fixed on the floor as he listened to the details he wished he could unhear. He had heard pieces of this story before, but hearing it laid out in such brutal terms made the reality of it even harder to bear. He wanted to escape, to run from the truth that now bound him to this nightmare, but he couldn't. He owed it to Abigail to see this through. The defense, however, was quick to counter. They attempted to humanize Howard, casting him as a man who had simply been caught up in an emotional affair that had spiraled out of control. They argued that he had acted out of passion, not premeditation, and that the murder was an impulsive act rather than a calculated one. They portrayed Howard as a man who had given into a moment of weakness, a man whose military career had left him emotionally distant and isolated, leading him to seek solace in an unexpected place. But it wasn't enough to sway the jury. The prosecution introduced text messages and emails between Howard and Abigail, showcasing the chilling transformation of Howard's affection into possessive obsession. They presented Abigail's last messages, filled with desperation and fear, as she tried to end things with Howard. The jury read her words, saw her attempts to break free, and the dark, desperate responses Howard had sent in return. One message in particular sent a ripple of horror through the courtroom. "You are mine, Abigail. Don't forget that. You can't just walk away." The courtroom fell silent as the prosecution displayed this message on the screen, each word stark and cold. The implication was clear. Howard's fixation on Abigail had turned deadly when she tried to leave him, and his refusal to let go had sealed her fate. As the trial continued, the prosecution called Abigail's friend Lisa to the stand. She recounted the last conversation she'd had with Abigail, the lunch where Abigail had confessed her affair and her plans to escape. Lisa's voice trembled as she described her friend's fear, the way Abigail had confided in her about Howard's possessiveness, his anger, his threats. It was a testimony that painted Howard as a man willing to cross any line, a man whose obsession had made him dangerous. The defense cross-examined Lisa, attempting to undermine her testimony by suggesting that Abigail had been confused and unstable, that she had exaggerated Howard's behavior out of fear or guilt. But Lisa held firm, her gaze unwavering as she looked Howard directly in the eye. "She was afraid of you," Lisa said, her voice filled with quiet defiance. "She thought you would hurt her, and she was right." On the final day of the trial, Howard himself took the stand. His attorney had advised against it, but Howard insisted, determined to speak his own version of events. He wore a suit that hung loosely on his frame, his face lined with stress and defiance. His voice was steady as he addressed the court, painting himself as a man who had simply lost control in a moment of passion. "I loved her," he said, his voice breaking. "I loved her, and I couldn't stand the thought of losing her. She came to me. She needed me. I wasn't some predator. I was the one who made her feel safe when her own husband couldn't. She was unhappy, and I tried to be there for her." The courtroom watched in silence as Howard spoke, his words carefully chosen, his tone rehearsed. But as he continued, the mask began to slip. His voice grew harsher, his gaze harder, as he described his relationship with Abigail. His words took on an edge that betrayed the darkness beneath. "I gave her everything," he hissed, his fists clenching. "Everything. And she thought she could just walk away. as if none of it mattered, as if I didn't matter. The prosecutor seized on this, questioning Howard about his sense of entitlement, his belief that he had a right to control Abigail's life. Howard's responses grew defensive, angry, revealing the twisted possessiveness that had driven him to murder. "You couldn't let her go, could you?" the prosecutor asked, his voice sharp. "You couldn't handle the idea of her living her own life, of her escaping your control. So you killed her." Howard's face twisted with rage, his composure finally shattering. "She betrayed me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. "After everything I did for her, she just wanted to leave. She was mine, and I couldn't let her go. I wouldn't let her go." The room fell into stunned silence, the weight of Howard's words hanging heavy in the air. The jury watched him, their expressions a mixture of horror and disbelief, as they saw the true face of the man who had once been a respected figure in their community. Howard's outburst had sealed his fate. The prosecution's case was ironclad, their evidence overwhelming, and his own confession on the stand had removed any lingering doubt. When the jury retired to deliberate, it took them only a few hours to reach a verdict. As the judge read the guilty verdict, a sense of finality washed over the courtroom. Howard Warren was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his obsession and betrayal ensuring he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Travis sat silently in the courtroom as the sentence was pronounced, his face expressionless as he listened to the words that would forever change his family's legacy. He felt a strange sense of emptiness, as though he were merely a spectator in someone else's nightmare. His father's actions had destroyed everything he had known, leaving him to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by secrets and lies. After the trial, Travis returned to the house he had once shared with Abigail. It was empty now, stripped of the warmth and laughter that had once filled its walls. As he walked through the rooms, memories flooded his mind, moments of happiness, of love, of a life that had been stolen from him. In the living room, he found one of Abigail's sketches, a rough pencil drawing she had done one lazy afternoon. It was a portrait of him, smiling and carefree, a version of himself he barely recognized. He sat down, staring at the drawing, his heart aching with a sorrow he couldn't put into words. He knew he would never fully heal from what had happened, but he also knew that he had to try. Abigail's memory deserved to be honored, not overshadowed by the darkness his father had brought into their lives. He resolved to rebuild, to find a way to move forward, even if the path was uncertain. As he left the house for the last time, locking the door behind him, Travis felt a strange sense of closure. His father's obsession had torn their lives apart, but he refused to let it define him. He would carry Abigail's memory with him, cherishing the love they had shared, while leaving the shadows of his past behind. In the end, the trial had not only exposed Howard's crimes, but it had also revealed the resilience of those left in the wake of his actions. Travis walked away from the courthouse with his head held high, determined to honor Abigail's life, to live in a way that would make her proud. Life after tragedy. Months passed after the trial, but the scars it left behind remained deeply embedded in Travis Warren's life. The house where Abigail had lived and died was sold, stripped of memories, and left to gather dust in someone else's story. But Travis knew that the pain, the confusion, and the lingering anger couldn't be so easily left behind. In the immediate aftermath, he had thought about leaving Fairfax altogether. Every corner of the town held memories of Abigail. Their favorite coffee shop where she would spend hours sketching on napkins, the park where they used to jog together in the early days of their relationship, and even the local library where they'd spent quiet Sunday afternoons. It all reminded him of a life that had ended too soon, leaving him haunted by thoughts of what could have been. But running away didn't feel like an option. Instead, Travis decided to stay and rebuild, to reclaim a life that had been shattered by betrayal and loss. It wasn't easy. He found himself struggling to get out of bed most mornings, weighed down by the relentless ache of grief. He didn't just mourn Abigail. He mourned the person he had once been, the version of himself that had existed before the truth came crashing down. Determined to find a way forward, Travis returned to work at his government contracting job, hoping the routine would provide him with some sense of normalcy. His colleagues greeted him with sympathy and understanding, though he could sense their discomfort, the unease in their eyes as they looked at him. He knew he had become something of a tragic figure in the office, a man marked by scandal, carrying the shadow of his family's shame wherever he went. The gossip had not entirely died down. The media had been relentless in covering the trial, sensationalizing every sordid detail of Howard's affair with Abigail, and Travis couldn't escape the whispers and glances that followed him. In the grocery store and at the gym, even during simple errands, people would recognize him, their faces a mix of pity and fascination. It felt as though he were living under a microscope, his grief dissected and analyzed by strangers who knew nothing of the depth of his pain. One day, after a particularly long and difficult shift, Travis found himself driving aimlessly through the city. He passed by places that once held happy memories, his heart twisting with every familiar sight. Eventually, he found himself at the entrance to Burke Lake Park, the same park where he and Abigail used to jog together. The park was quiet, the winter air cold and crisp as he walked along the familiar paths, his thoughts heavy with memories. As he reached the edge of the lake, he sat down on a bench, staring out at the still waters. It was here, in this quiet solitude, that he allowed himself to finally let go, to feel the full weight of his sorrow and anger, to mourn without restraint. Tears streamed down his face as he thought of everything he had lost, everything that had been taken from him by his father's selfishness and Abigail's tragic vulnerability. Why? He whispered to the empty air, his voice breaking. Why did it have to end this way? The only answer was the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, a reminder of the silence that had filled his life since Abigail's death. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as he let the grief wash over him, not fighting it but embracing it, allowing himself to truly feel the pain he had been suppressing for so long. In the weeks that followed, Travis began to take small steps toward healing. He attended grief counseling sessions at a local support group, where he met others who had lost loved ones under tragic circumstances. It was difficult at first, sharing his story, opening up about the shame and sorrow that had defined his life since Abigail's death. But gradually he found solace in the shared pain of others, in the understanding and compassion they offered him without judgment. One woman in the group, Carla, had lost her daughter in a car accident just months earlier. She had a gentle, nurturing presence, and she listened to Travis's story with a kindness that made him feel seen for the first time in months. She encouraged him to talk about Abigail, to remember the good memories as well as the painful ones, to keep her spirit alive in his heart. Grief doesn't go away, Travis, she told him one evening after a session. But it changes. It becomes part of who you are, something you carry with you, but it doesn't have to consume you. You find ways to live with it, to make peace with it. Her words resonated with him, giving him a new perspective on his loss. He began to look at his memories of Abigail not as a source of pain, but as a gift, a reminder of the love they had shared, however brief and tumultuous. He started keeping a journal, writing down his memories of her, recording the little things he never wanted to forget. The way her laughter filled a room, the softness of her touch, the warmth of her smile. In time, Travis realized that he wanted to do something more to honor Abigail's memory. She had been passionate about her work with charities and humanitarian organizations, dedicating her talents to causes that mattered to her. He decided to channel his grief into something meaningful, something that would carry on her legacy and keep her spirit alive in the world. With this goal in mind, he reached out to a nonprofit organization that focused on providing art therapy to children in underserved communities. Abigail had often spoken about the healing power of art, and Travis thought it would be a fitting way to honor her memory. He volunteered his time, helping with fundraising efforts, organizing events, and using his skills to support a cause she would have loved. Through this work, Travis began to find a renewed sense of purpose. He met people who shared Abigail's passion for helping others, people who believed in the power of art to heal and transform lives. It was in these moments, surrounded by people who understood the importance of empathy and compassion, that Travis felt closest to her. He could almost imagine her by his side, her presence a comforting shadow as he continued the work she had started. One evening, several months later, Travis received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from a woman named Karen, who introduced herself as Abigail's former mentor in the design world. She had heard about Abigail's death and wanted to reach out to share her memories of the talented, compassionate young woman she had once known. The letter was filled with stories about Abigail's kindness, her creativity, and her dedication to her work. Karen described how Abigail had once spent an entire weekend volunteering at a charity event, creating posters and banners for free because she believed in the cause. She wrote about the way Abigail had encouraged other young designers, always willing to lend a helping hand or offer advice. Reading the letter, Travis felt a surge of pride and love for Abigail. She had been a remarkable person, someone who had touched the lives of everyone she met. In that moment, he realized that her legacy was more than just the tragedy that had ended her life. It was the kindness, the generosity, the passion that had defined who she was. He decided to frame the letter and place it in his home, a reminder of the impact Abigail had made on the world, a tribute to the woman he had loved and lost. He knew that moving forward wouldn't erase the pain, but he also knew that he could carry her memory with him, honoring her in the way he chose to live his life. As the months turned into a year, Travis found himself slowly piecing his life back together. He reconnected with old friends, mended relationships that had frayed in the wake of the tragedy, and even began to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. He had changed, of course. He would never be the same person he had been before, but he had found a new strength within himself, a resilience born from the depths of his grief. One afternoon, as he walked through Burke Lake Park, he paused at the bench where he had once sat, lost in sorrow. The lake was calm, the sun casting a warm glow over the water, and he felt a strange sense of peace. He knew that Abigail was gone, that he would carry the memory of her love and her loss for the rest of his life. But he also knew that he could move forward, that he could live a life that honored her memory without being consumed by it. As he sat on the bench, he whispered a quiet goodbye, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. It wasn't an end, but a new beginning, a chance to carry her spirit with him as he embraced the future. With a final, deep breath, Travis stood up, letting go of the pain that had once held him captive. He walked away from the lake, his steps steady, his heart filled with a newfound sense of purpose. He knew that he would always miss Abigail, that there would be moments when the grief would return, sharp and sudden. But he also knew that he could survive, that he could build a life filled with meaning and hope, a life that would make her proud. A legacy of love and resilience. A year after Abigail's death and the devastating revelations that had turned his life upside down, Travis Warren stood on the brink of a new chapter. The journey from heartbreak to healing had not been easy. It had been a series of small steps, of painful realizations, and hard-fought victories over his own despair. Yet through it all, he had found strength in the love he still held for Abigail, a love that now fueled his determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of their tragic story. In the months since the trial, Travis had poured his energy into the nonprofit he'd begun working with, dedicating his time and resources to support their art therapy programs. Inspired by Abigail's passion for creativity and compassion, he had decided to fund a special initiative in her name, the Abigail Warren Creative Healing Project, a program designed to provide art therapy sessions for children in underserved communities, many of whom had experienced trauma and loss. The project quickly gained traction, attracting donors and supporters who believed in its mission. Travis was deeply moved by the outpouring of support, but he was also keenly aware that this wasn't just a charity. This was Abigail's legacy. It was a way for him to ensure that her kindness, her creativity, and her unwavering compassion lived on. He wanted the world to remember her not as the woman who had fallen victim to tragedy, but as someone who had brought light and healing to others. The first official event for the Abigail Warren Creative Healing Project was scheduled for spring, and Travis threw himself into organizing it, working closely with the nonprofit's team to make it a success. He spent countless hours coordinating with volunteers, setting up art stations, and reaching out to local schools and community centers to invite children and their families. The event would offer a full day of creative activities, including painting, drawing, and sculpture, all under the guidance of experienced art therapists. As the day of the event approached, Travis felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He knew that this was more than just a gathering. It was a celebration of Abigail's life and a testament to the healing power of art. He wanted it to be perfect, to honor her in a way that truly reflected who she was. The morning of the event dawned bright and clear, the spring sun casting a warm glow over the community center where the event was being held. Travis arrived early, helping the team set up tables and arrange art supplies. He felt a strange sense of calm as he worked, as if Abigail's spirit was with him, guiding him, reassuring him that he was on the right path. By mid-morning, families began to arrive, filling the space with laughter and excitement. Children of all ages gathered around the art stations, their eyes wide with wonder as they explored the materials laid out before them. Some were shy, hesitating at first, while others dove in eagerly, their small hands reaching for paintbrushes and clay. As the activities began, Travis walked around the room, watching as the children expressed themselves through their art. He saw a little girl carefully painting a sunflower, her face scrunched up in concentration. A young boy molding a clay figure with intense focus. A teenager sketching quietly in the corner, lost in his own world. Each child was different, but they all shared something in common: a sense of wonder, a need to express the feelings they often struggled to put into words. One boy in particular caught Travis's attention. He was about 10 years old, with a mop of curly hair and a serious expression. He sat alone at a table, sketching furiously on a piece of paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. Curious, Travis approached him, kneeling down to get a closer look. "Hey there," Travis said softly. "That's some impressive work. What are you drawing?" The boy looked up, his dark eyes meeting Travis's with a mix of curiosity and wariness. After a moment, he held up his drawing. A sketch of a dragon, fierce and powerful, its wings spread wide as it soared over a jagged mountain range. "Wow," Travis said, genuinely impressed. "That's amazing. You're really talented." The boy shrugged, a hint of pride flashing in his eyes. "Thanks. I like drawing dragons. They're strong. They're not afraid of anything." Travis smiled, understanding the sentiment behind the boy's words. "You know, I think art can make us feel like that too. Strong, brave. Sometimes, when things get tough, creating something can help us feel like we have control, like we can face anything." The boy nodded, looking down at his drawing with a thoughtful expression. "Yeah, I guess it helps. My mom says I've been different since my dad left. She thought this might make me feel better." Travis felt a pang of empathy, recognizing the familiar shadow of loss in the boy's eyes. He reached out, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You know, I lost someone really important to me too. And it's hard. But finding a way to express those feelings, to put them into something beautiful, that's a powerful thing. It's like a way to keep a part of them with you." The boy looked at him, a glimmer of understanding in his gaze. "Yeah, I think I get it." As he walked away, Travis felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet assurance that he was doing something meaningful. Abigail's dream of bringing healing through art was alive, and in that small moment, he felt her presence more strongly than ever. By late afternoon, the event was winding down. The children proudly displayed their creations, showing off paintings, clay sculptures, and drawings that reflected their unique imaginations. Parents mingled, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to participate in such a healing experience, and several approached Travis to thank him personally, their words filled with genuine appreciation. One woman, a mother of 3, took his hand and held it tightly. "You've given these kids a gift," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's rare for them to have a space like this, to be able to create without judgment, without pressure. You're helping them more than you know." Travis thanked her, feeling both humbled and honored. He knew that this was only the beginning, that there was so much more he wanted to do, so many more lives he wanted to touch in Abigail's memory. He envisioned expanding the project, organizing more events, reaching out to other communities that could benefit from the healing power of art. It was a way to give back, but also to keep Abigail's spirit alive, a legacy of love and resilience that would continue long after him. Later that evening, after the last of the families had left and the community center had emptied, Travis stayed behind to clean up. He carefully collected the children's leftover art supplies, placing them in boxes to be stored for the next event. As he worked, he noticed a small, unfinished painting left behind on one of the tables. It was a simple piece, a mix of bright colors swirling together, but there was something about it that struck him, a sense of joy, of freedom. He picked up the painting, studying it for a moment before deciding to keep it. It felt like a symbol of the day, a reminder of the healing that had taken place within those walls. He knew that he would frame it, placing it alongside the framed letter from Abigail's mentor, creating a small gallery of memories that honored her legacy. As he left the community center, the painting tucked under his arm, Travis felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for so long. The pain of losing Abigail would never fully disappear. It would always be a part of him. But he had found a way to carry her memory forward, to turn his grief into something that brought light to others. It was a journey that had broken him, but it had also made him stronger, filling him with a resilience he hadn't known he possessed. In the quiet of the evening, as he walked to his car, Travis looked up at the sky. The stars were bright, twinkling like tiny beacons of hope against the darkness. He thought of Abigail, of her laughter, her warmth, her unbreakable spirit. She was gone, but she was not lost. She was there, in the beauty of the stars, in the art that had filled the community center, in the lives of the children she had inspired. He whispered a quiet promise to her, a vow to continue this journey, to carry her legacy with him wherever he went. "Thank you, Abby," he murmured, his voice filled with love. "For everything. I'll make sure you're remembered, that your kindness lives on." With a final, steadying breath, Travis got into his car, feeling a profound sense of purpose as he drove into the night. The future was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid. He knew that as long as he kept Abigail's memory alive, as long as he continued to honor her through acts of compassion and healing, he would find his way. In the end, he realized that his life had become a tapestry of love and resilience, woven from the threads of tragedy and triumph. Abigail's legacy would endure, not as a reminder of her death, but as a celebration of her life, a life that had touched so many, and one that would continue to inspire for years to come. And with that, Travis Warren embraced his new path, carrying forward a legacy that would bring light to a world often overshadowed by darkness, a legacy built on the unbreakable bonds of love and the enduring strength of the human spirit.